Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in 1 Kings chapter 5, and we're going to be studying Solomon is going to build the temple. Now, what is interesting about this is really the first house of God. A couple of points I want to make before I move on with this. So one, when Israel came out of Egypt, what they constructed was sort of a portable tent that they called the tabernacle. And that was the place of worship. But it was always meant to be temporary. And it was, again, it was meant to be moved. So especially during the wilderness years, the Levites would assemble and disassemble whenever they moved or stayed still. Today, and I'll just say this, what is typically called the house of God is really in error, because the house of God today is the body of Christ. So not a physical building. So oftentimes people say, I'm going to church, and they say it, and they refer to a building as the house of God. That is actually in error. Okay? Because the true temple, the true house, is Jesus' body, which is believers. Okay? So the church building is just where the true house assembles. Now, in this case, Solomon is building an actual temple where the presence of God resided. This is where they would make atonements. This is where they would worship. Okay? And so, let's get into it. Solomon is going to build the temple of God here. So verse 1 says, Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servant to Solomon when he had heard that he had been anointed king in his father's place, for Hiram had always been friends with David. Now, you remember, we'll probably get more into this when we get into Chronicles. And David it did a lot of preparations for Solomon to come to this point right here. Verse 2, Solomon sent this message to Hiram. You know, my father David was not able to build a temple for the name of Yahweh his God. This was because of the warfare all around him until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. The Lord, my God, has now given me rest all around. And there is no enemy or crisis, so I plan to build a temple for the name of Yahweh my God, according to what the Lord promised my father David. I will put your son on your throne in your place, and he will build the temple for my name. And then he says, therefore command that the cedars from Lebanon be cut down for me, and my servants will be with your servants, and I will pay your servants wages according to whatever you say, for you know that not a man among us knows how to cut timber like the Syrians. Okay, now let me read. I'll read verse 7. Well, let me say this. We're going to see later that, yeah, Solomon is shrewd here. He's making this deal with Hiram to build and cut the timber. Let's go on and read verse 7. When Hiram heard Solomon's words, he greatly rejoiced and said, may the Lord be praised today. He has given David a wise son to be over his great people. Now, I'll say this about this statement here. This is one of the examples. There are a few examples. This is one of the examples where you have a king and a nation that God blessed because they recognized the blessing on Israel. They didn't seek to overthrow it. They didn't seek to destroy it. But they recognized God's hand on Israel here. Verse 8. Then Hiram sent a reply to Solomon saying, I've heard your message and I will do everything you want regarding the cedar and cypress timbers. My servants will bring the logs down from Lebanon to the sea, and I will make them into rafts to go by the sea into the place you indicate. I will break them apart there, and you can take them away. You then can meet my needs by providing my household with food. It's this is really kind of a low wage here, that he's not really charging Solomon a lot of money, right, or a lot of gold or something like that. Verse 10, so Hiram provided Solomon with all the cedar and cypress timbers he wanted. Solomon provided Hiram with 100,000 bushels of wheat as for food for his household, and 110,000 gallons of oil from crushed olives. Solomon did this for Hiram year after year. And the Lord gave Solomon wisdom as he had promised him. And there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. And so one of the things that I said before, that David was a little skeptical. Well, he didn't have a lot of, he thought Solomon was a little on the weak side. Actually, Solomon proved to be, of course, even before God gave him this wisdom, Solomon kind of proved David wrong. And he probably was he wasn't a man's man. David was a man's man of the wilderness. He was a man of war. Solomon probably was more, inside, stayed in the house, stayed under his mama, That in itself wasn't a bad thing, but like I say, David kind of thought he was inexperienced. That's the word he used. Verse 13. Then King Solomon drafted forced laborers from all of Israel. And the labor force numbered 30,000 men. He sent 10,000 to Lebanon each month in shifts. 1 month they were in Lebanon, 2 months they were at home. Adoram was in charge of the forced labor. Solomon had 70,000 porters and 80,000 stone cutters in the mountains, not including his 3,300 deputies in charge of the work. They ruled over the people doing the work. And the king commanded them to quarry large, costly stones and to lay the foundation of the temple with dressed stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram builders, along with the Gibeonites, quarried the stones and prepared the timber and the stones for the temple completion. Now, this is an impressive labor force that Solomon put together. Later we will see that this was one of the most expensive taxation, and it will lead to an overbearing taxing of the people. Now we'll see this later on in a few chapters after Solomon's life, that the people will plead with his son to just ease the tax burden. But we can see here, all of this right here, it looks kind of, it looks like it is wise, but like I say, there was a lot of taxes. In other words, whenever you see this, you can always ask yourself when it comes to government, how is this being paid for? And in Solomon's case, he really taxed the people. All right, chapter 6, verse 1. Solomon began to build the temple for the Lord in the 480th year after the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt, and in the 4th year of his reign over Israel, in the 2nd month, in the month of Ziv. Okay, now this is a very, very stunning timeline. Notice he said 480th year. So if you go back 480 years, right? And sometimes it's kind of interesting here in terms of the timeline. It could be somewhat confusing. For example, the period of the judges. So this would be the time from the end of Joshua's life, okay, to this time, or the period of the judges themselves was about 430 years. Now, when you add to that the 80 years of King Saul's reign and then David's reign, there's if you go off that, there's a discrepancy of about 75 years. Now that kind of goes back to how we then counting the timeline, right? And I'm sorry, and actually, you also have to count the 40 years, beginning at the Passover, and then you have to kind of count the time of Joshua. So it's actually going to probably be a little more how they are counting this timeline here. But notice he said 480 years from the time they walked out of Egypt. This is when this temple is starting to build. So for you, those that like to delve into things like that, that would be a good homework. How do you count the timeline here? Right? So Moses was 80 years old when he brought the people out of Egypt. They wandered in the wilderness 40 years. Now, it could be sometimes that certain timelines are not given in the most precise way. So, if somebody asks me, how long have I been in Chicago? And I say, 40 years. The reality is I've been in Chicago more than 40 years. I'm not giving. In other words, I'm not meaning to give you an exact timeline. Now, on the other hand, if I was doing an exact timeline for medical reasons or some kind of timeline, legal timeline, I might be a little more exact, right? So anyway, this is kind of interesting here. But anyway, 480 years from the time they come. It gives us a general timeline too of what's going on, where we are right here in the biblical history. Verse 2. The temple that King Solomon built for the Lord was 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Now, I'm going to give, and this is just a artist rendition here. An artist rendition. That's the. This is kind of, again, I don't know if this is exactly true, but if you Google this, a lot of these pictures will come up, okay, of how the temple looked, approximately too, how it looked. All right, so you can see just in your mind kind of a picture there. All right, let's go back here. So again, it was 90 feet long, kind of saw that, 30 feet wide, 45 feet high. The portico in front of the temple sanctuary was 30 feet long, extending across the temple's width and 15 feet deep. In front of the temple, he also made windows with beveled frames for the temple. He then built a chamber structure along with the temple wall, encircling the walls of the temple, that is the sanctuary and the inner sanctuary. He made the sides chambers all around. Now, of course, I'm going to read through this fast right here. That's why I gave you that picture, and you could just, again, I'll go, probably when I come out of here, you can refer to the picture. But I'm just going to read through this tedious description of the building and construction of the temple. Verse 6, the lower chamber was 7.5 feet wide, and the middle was 9 feet wide, and the third was 10.5 feet wide. He also provided offset ledges for the temple all around and outside so that nothing would be inserted in the temple wall. The temple's construction used finished stones cut at the quarry so that no hammer, chisel, or iron tool was ever heard in the temple while it was being worked. In other words, they would construct the stones first and then ship them in and put them in place. You can kind of get an idea. Sometimes we do that too. Like, for example, windows are prefabricated and then sent when you're building a home, things like that. Verse 8, the door of the lower side chamber was on the right side of the temple. They went up the stairway to the middle of the chamber, from the middle into the third. And when he had finished building the temple, he paneled it with boards and planks and cedars. He built the chambers along the entire temple, joined the temple with cedar beams. Each story was 7.5 feet high. Kind of interesting when it says each story was 7.5 feet wide. By the way, our story is about 8 feet, average about 8 feet in terms of it, if you look in your house. Verse 11. The word of the Lord came to Solomon, as for this temple you're building, if you walk in my statutes, observe my ordinances, and keep all my commandments by walking in them, I will fulfill my promise to you, which I made to your father David. I will live among the Israelites and not abandon my people. Now you notice this commandment also has a condition on it. In other words, you have to walk in my ways, which the Israelites will never do. Verse 14, when Solomon finished the building of the temple, he paneled the interior temple walls with cedar and boards from the temple floor to the surface of the ceiling. He overlaid the interior with wood. He also overlaid the floor with cypress boards, and then he lined 30 feet of the rear temple with cedar boards. From the floor of the surface of the ceiling, he built the interior as an inner sanctuary in the most holy place. The temple that was the sanctuary in the front of the most holy place was 60 feet long. The cedar panel inside the temple was carved with ornament, gourds, and flower blossoms. Everything was cedar, and not a stone could be seen. He prepared the inner sanctuary inside the temple to put the Ark of the Lord's covenant there. The interior of the sanctuary was 30 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 30 feet high. He overlaid it with pure gold. He also overlaid the cedars, altars, and next Solomon overlaid the interior of the temple with pure gold, and he hung gold chains across the front of the inner sanctuary, and he overlaid it with gold. So he added the gold overlay to the entire temple until everything was completely finished, including the entire altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary. Now we'll see later on one of the jewels that Nebuchadnezzar would do is to take all this gold out. This thing was just literally, saturated with gold. Verse 23, the inner sanctuary, he made 2 cherubims 15 feet high out of olive wood. One wing of the first cherubim was 7.5 feet long, and the other wing was 7.5 feet long, and the wing spring was 15 feet from tip to tip. The second cherubim was about 15 feet. Both cherubims had the same size and shape. The first cherubim's height was 15 feet. So was the second cherub. These are pictures of angels kind of guarding the altar. Verse 27. Then he put the cherub inside the inner temple, since their wings were spread out. The first wing touched one wall, while the second cherub wing touched the other wall. And in the middle of the temple, the rings were touching wing to wing. He also overlaid the cherubims with gold. He carved all the surrounding temple walls with carved engravings, cherubims, palm trees, and flower blossoms in both inner and outer sanctuaries. He overlaid the temple floor with gold in both the inner and outer sanctuaries. And for the entrance of the inner sanctuary, he made olive wood doors, and the pillars of the door posts were 5-sided. Then the 2 doors were made of olive wood. He carved cherub, palm trees, and flower blossoms on them, and overlaid them with gold, hammering gold over the cherub and the palm trees. In the same way, he made 4-sided olive wood doorposts for the sanctuary entrance. The 2 doors were made of cypress wood. The first door had 2 folding sides, and the second door had 2 folding panels. And he carved cherubim, palm trees, and flower blossoms on them, and overlaid them with gold, and applied evenly over the carvings. He built the inner courtyard with 3 rows of dressed stone and a row of trim simmer beams. And the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid in Solomon's 4th year, in the month of Zib. In the 11th year, in the 8th month, the month of Bull, the temple was completed in every detail according to the specification. So he built it in 7 years. So all this, you can see, it took about 7 years to build this temple, which looked something like this. and uh, something like that. But all right, guys, we'll pick it up in chapter 7 in the next study. And don't forget to like and share these videos. And don't forget to subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. Hit that subscribe button. Look, I'll see you next time.